Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellknight here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. It's Tuesday, and the patch notes for patch 9.17 have been posted, and that means it's time for another patch note rundown. As always, I'm going through the biggest changes in this week's patch, and letting you guys know what you can be looking forward to in the coming weeks. 9.17 is an absolutely minuscule patch. There are a few relevant changes here, but not an absolute ton of changes as a whole, but that's because Riot are trying to get ready for Worlds and make sure that that tournament's patch is going to be very solid and very consistent. Either way, let's go ahead and jump right into things. We're going to go ahead and start with the Aurelion Sol changes. He has a whole bunch of stuff on the in the patch coming out. Now, a lot of these changes are aimed at making Aurelion Sol a little bit more approachable to play. So if you're used to the old Aurelion Sol where you're able to just kind of press W and create that big zoning field, especially in the later stages of the game, well, that's not really an option anymore, but we'll get to that. First and foremost, his center of the universe, his passive damage has been decreased, and the ratio has had its damage decreased, but ability inhibiting crowd control no longer nullifies center of the universe. So silences, stuns, suppressions, whatever, you no longer lose your stars, which is actually pretty big because it means even if you get crowd controlled, you will still be able to deal at least some damage back to your attacker with your stars continuing to rotate. So that's a very interesting change, but it's in order to make it so that new players are like, oh, where'd my stars go? Now it works in the way you would expect it, which is they are always on. Star Surge's cooldown has been increased, and the movement speed has been increased as well, and if Aurelion Sol is faster than his star will speed up to keep up with him, so that'll help making big stars a little bit easier. The biggest change here is to his W. Now it's an active ability rather than a toggle, so it's got a flat mana cost. It doesn't do per second or anything anymore. When you activate it, he pushes his stars out to the outer limit, they gain increased damage, and rotate at a high but decaying speed. After 3 seconds, or if he reactivates it early, they retract and grant him bonus movement speed that decays over a small duration. Now, so this means it's a windowed ability. You don't just get to toggle it on or off whenever you desire. Now you need to pick your moment, press W, and really try to get some damage in. No word yet as to how high that speed is, how many star hits you're likely to get through, but it does feel like it's really going to reward more skilled Aurelion Sol players than people who are used to just being able to toggle it on and then play with their positioning to try and get star hits in. The other thing this does is make him a lot more accessible to newer players who aren't going to be used to the toggle management. Instead, this is a lot more press button, spell does thing, I can play around that. Now, the cooldown does go down to 2 seconds at maximum rank, and so after CDR, that's barely a cooldown at all. So in the later stages of the game, Aurelion Sol will still be able to maintain an almost constant wall of stars, but it's not nearly as good as it used to be, so that is a big change for him there. Finally, Common of Legend has a couple of changes here. The range and the speed are significantly increased, especially the range at level 1 is 5,500 where it used to be 3,000. So Aurelion Sol can really get some major roams off with this ability. However, the cooldown's been increased to compensate. It's an 80-second cooldown at rank 1 and scales down to a 60-second cooldown at maximum rank. So this is basically an ultimate level ability on Aurelion Sol's kit, which is really kind of silly, but the increased range does give him a bunch of options, so I'm not going to say it's that unacceptable of a nerf there. So really weird changes for Aurelion Sol. Gonna take me a while to figure out exactly how these are going to affect the champion, but definitely interesting and definitely will make him a bit easier and more friendly to play. Moving on to Galio, who's been underperforming for the last few patches. It's no surprise he's been, I think, the least picked champion and the least winningest champion over the last couple of patches, so Riot are trying to throw him a couple of bones here. First is mana regen. That's just a rounding thing. It is a slight buff, but not really even worth considering as a buff. Winds of War's cooldown has been decreased, give him a little bit more to do in lane, and Shield of Duran's damage is actually going up here. The maximum damage is increasing by 90 points at maximum rank, which is a huge deal. If you're able to hit somebody with that, you're actually going to do a ton of damage to somebody, and this should help Galio a little bit. I don't think it addresses the problems you're having with the character, but that's a video for another day. I'm not going to bother talking about that here. Moving on to Kayle. Now, I already made a video about these changes. I did talk about this previously and how these changes do a lot to homogenize a character with a very unique power curve into something that we've already seen and already have plenty of in the game, and bring Kayle back to her original state, which is not that interesting and which was more tricky to balance. Now that I've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk through the changes that actually did go live, just in case you haven't seen that video. First and foremost, her passive is getting some major changes. She now gets her ranged auto attacks at level 6 and her AoE auto attacks at level 11. She also only gets 8% movement speed when she's able to fully prime her passive, but it's now 8% in all directions as opposed to just towards enemies. Finally, she is able to stack her passive with all basic attacks instead of just basic attacks against non-structures, and the attack range on her range form is down by 25. She's now Lucian attack range versus someone like Vayne attack range. Finally, she does have a few changes in here. She no longer gets 10% bonus attack speed per stack when she hits her ranged auto attack form, and her Transcendent Fire Wave true damage is no longer there. That's right, she just will deal magic damage on those AoE auto attacks. She doesn't have the true damage shred. Finally, when she is able to hit Transcendent form, she gains an additional 50 range for a total of 575 attack range on her basic attacks, which is still a good bonus for hitting your level 16, but definitely not nearly as good as it used to be hitting your true damage. Q has generally been nerfed. The cast delay has been decreased, but don't let that fool you. That's a buff in the early stages of the game, but because it's scaled with her attack speed timer, the cast time I should say, that means that Kayle can't run away as quickly in the late stages of the game. She still has to sit through that quarter second of cast time no matter what, whereas before she used to be able to quick cast that in the later stages when she had very high amounts of attack speed. The missile speed was decreased, the range was decreased, the resistance shred was decreased, everything about this ability was nerfed except the cast delay early on in the game, and the fact that it now refunds 50% of its mana for every champion hit with it, which is an irrelevant buff. So that just has been straight nerfed. Starfire Spellblade has also received some nerfs here. The bonus magic damage is now 12% of the target's missing health as opposed to 16% at maximum rank. The scaling is slightly better, but since Kayle doesn't even really build that much AP on most situations and most builds, ends up being mostly irrelevant as well. But the on-hit ratio for AP did increase as well, so this might open up some high AP builds for Kayle again. We'll have to see. Finally, Divine Judgment did receive some buffs here, so not everything is doom and gloom for Kayle. The mana cost has been decreased down to 0 mana at maximum rank, so Kayle will always be able to cast Divine Judgment if she's out of mana. And the AoE is slightly a lot wider, so she'll be able to hit more champions. Now, the biggest thing is Kayle will be better in the early game. She gets that ranged auto attack at level 6, so she'll be able to keep herself at a safer range from enemy champions, but it's now no longer completely Kayle's game plan to just try to scale the late game and hit your final form and just shred everybody, because she deals magic damage on those auto attacks, so there's a lot more options to itemize against her. She doesn't just deal true damage and kill everybody, so it is going to be a lot more on the Kayle player in order to try and deal with her lane and make an impact earlier in the game. She still is going to scale to be good, but she's no longer the best champion in the game later. She's more along the lines of Kog'Maw or Vayne, where if you can protect this champion, they're going to carry the fight, but they're not just going to put the game solidly on their back and guarantee that you win. So, and again, I've talked about what I personally think of these changes, but generally speaking, this is going to be a buff early, nerf late. Moving on, Lucian is actually getting a very small buff. Now, I know this is 3 AD, and a lot of people are probably already making the memes over on forums and Reddit and everything, but this is actually substantial. This means every single auto attack he makes, every ability he casts is going to be doing slightly more damage, and this should help Lucian compete a little bit more with the late game champions that are running around rampant in the early stages of the game because they know that they have no predators to deal with them. So this is definitely something to keep an eye on. Pantheon is getting some small quality of life changes following his rework. Right, we're very, very scared of how strong Pantheon jungle could be, especially given that Aegis Assault would allow him to proc the Hunter's Talisman with every single hit for a ton of damage and a ton of sustain, but they pulled back too far, and so they are going to be making some changes here. Aegis Assault now has no reduced damage against non-epic monsters, so he gets full damage from that ability against monsters, and Comet Spear, if you thrust it, so not the full charge throw, but if you just stab forward, it also increases the physical damage on targets below 25%, so giving that certain death passive both to the thrust spear and the thrown spear, so that's a very small buffs. I'm hesitantly optimistic. I think Pantheon's still in a good spot. These are more of quality of life things to make him feel a little bit better, but I don't think in general that these changes are going to go too far to making him too good. So these are fairly nice, especially if you are trying to play Pantheon in the jungle. Finally, let's talk about Qiyana here. she's really good as it turns out, especially given that her ultimate basically has no cooldown in the later stages of the game. You just use that off cooldown because, well, you don't have to worry about it. It's going to come back off cooldown in 30 seconds. So Qiyana is getting some nerfs here. Now, the base damage nerf on Audacity is in order to nerf her early trade damage, so she's not quite as overbearing in lane. And then, obviously, her R's cooldown is going up to 120 seconds at all ranks. Now, Qiyana does build a lot of CDR, so she will be able to get that cooldown back down, but this is definitely going to mean that Qiyana will have to think very long and hard about when and where she wants to use Supreme Display of Talent, as opposed to just sort of firing it off cooldown. And that's generally it. There are a couple other changes in here that are fairly minor, and I don't think that they're going to have a big impact on the meta or generally in anything that's getting played in solo queue. So that's sort of it. The Aurelion Sol changes and the Kayle changes are the biggest ones to sort of keep your eyes on going forward. But going forward, this is a very, very small patch, so shouldn't be too big of a change from what you're used to on live currently. Thank you all so very much for watching this video. Go ahead and let me know which changes you're most excited for down in the comments section below, especially if you're optimistic about the Kayle changes. I know I've been all doom and gloom about them, but let me know what you think of that. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days like today as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.